Hi, Gwen, it's Michelle. And I can continue to put the screen up with the numbers. If you would just let me know when you're ready, then we should be good to go.
Excellent, thank you. We've got 3 minutes until the meeting starts, and I don't know why I have the same question every week, but I want to get the participant list in a column on the right-hand side and then have the full Zoom.
Mary Ann's on her way.
It's the same thing every week.
I think if you hover, click participants,
Okay,
and that shows it there, and then click it again, it'll go away.
it's just because you're standing here.
Of
I've
course,
been
yeah.
doing that back and forth, and okay,
There
well,
might have been a delay.
you just have to come in and stand next to me every time. Thank you.
You're welcome. Madam Chair, eScribe is ready to go for you.
Thank you. We have, well, we're supposed to start at 2:05, I believe. So actually, we have 6 more minutes. So we'll just sit tight.
Madam Chair, there is somebody in the waiting room. Did you want me to admit them?
Yes, please. I was trying to do that and couldn't track them down. Thank you. I like your guest, Sandra.
Thanks. It's my parents' puppy. She's a handful.
Very cute. Okay, I think we're ready to go. Going to call to order the Administration and Finance Committee meeting today for June 10th, 2020. I'm going to do roll call first, and if we can post the call-in numbers for public comment while we do roll call, that would be helpful. So let's put those call-in numbers back up. As everyone should be aware, at this point we are doing virtual meetings, so I will call for public comment after I do roll call, and these are the phone numbers you can use to access the meeting for public comment on items not on the agenda. And I will read out the call-in number. It's 253-215-8782. And the meeting ID is 960-049-3694. So please call in and mute your devices as there is a lag time. In the meantime, while that's posted, I will do roll call. So Anderson. And I think I have everyone muted. Hang on a second.
I'm present.
Okay, thank you. Becerra.
Present.
Santos.
Here.
Harp.
Present.
Hess.
Present.
Jones is present. Merritt.
Present.
Ramos. Not present. Cheryl. Ms. Cheryl, I know you are down the hall, so if you're still accessing, there you go. Okay. Vasika,
Present.
Von Lossberg,
Present.
and West.
Present.
Great, thank you. Okay, we can take the public comment info down and go back to our regular Zoom screen. We have approval of the minutes from June 3rd. Were there any changes to those minutes? Seeing none, those will stand approved. And is there any public comment on items not on the agenda? So we will give that a few seconds in case anyone is trying to call in. I do not see anyone in the waiting room right now, but we'll give it a few minutes, a couple of seconds here. Okay, seeing no one, we are going to go forward with the items on our agenda. We have 3 items. The first one, 3.1, is a motion. It's for Truett Consulting for a contract for the Link project. So we should have Montana James here to present briefly on that. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So that's correct. We have a contract agreement amendment with Truett Consulting. It's changing section 5 of the original award agreement for total payment from $21,760 for the grant year up to $26,389 for the year, which runs August 1, 2019 through July 31 of 2020. As a quick background, the city of Missoula in 2019 was the first city in the nation to receive a Science Education Partnership Award from the National Institutes of Health. This award funds a project led by Holly Truitt, which is our principal investigator, and co-investigator Dr. Rachel Severson at the University of Montana, to position the Link, which is Missoula's new library museum complex, which opens this year, as a vibrant third place and a hub for science, health learning, healthy living, and STEM role model engagement. The Office of Housing and Community Development, as the awardee of the grant, manages these subcontracts with the folks working on the project. And Holly Truitt needed this award amendment this year in order to adjust line item expenses to account for some additional work that she had to do, both to manage some project delays because of COVID, and also to complete and submit a supplemental grant application to the NIH to continually kind of enhance programming associated with the project this year. So as a recap, the contract amendment does not have a financial implication for the city budget. It's a reallocation of all grant funds from the National Institutes of Health. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Okay, questions from council. Ms. Merritt.
I don't have a question, but I'd be happy to make the recommended motion. I'm glad that Holly Truitt's working on this for us. She's been doing a great job so far, and I am super excited to see what comes out of this when the library gets open.
Great, thank you. And that motion is in order. Are there any other comments or questions from council? Seeing none, is there any public comment on this item? And I will read the numbers off if we can post the information again, and please be calling in. To call in for public comment, 253-215-8782, meeting ID number 960-049-3694. Those numbers are posted, and I will look for anyone in the waiting room if you are calling in to give public comment on this item. Not seeing anyone, so we will go forward with a roll call vote on this item. To you, Marianne.
Thank you. Anderson,
Yes.
Becerra,
Yes.
Contos,
Yes.
Harp,
Yes.
Hess,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Merritt,
Yes.
Cheryl,
Yes.
Vasika,
Yes.
Von Lossberg,
Yes.
West,
Yes.
unanimous in favor.
Thank you. That will go onto the consent agenda. Thank you, Montana. Good seeing you. Hope to see you in person in 2020. The next item on our agenda is 3.2, the health insurance stop loss agreement, and we have our risk manager, Mike Brady, here to present on that. Good afternoon. Oh, you are muted, Mr. Brady. If you can unmute yourself. There you go. Is it working? We'll give it a few seconds here. Marianne or Michelle, do we need to do something to unmute Mr. Brady so that he can speak to us?
It looks like he's unmuted now. Mike, can you say,
We do not read lips. This is not.
Mike, I know
The
your
chances,
excuse me.
hi, the chances are, Mike, that your computer is not recognizing the microphone on your headset as, or Zoom is not recognizing that as the microphone to use.
Does he maybe need to disconnect his microphone and just use the computer?
I've had to do that. in past meetings.
Mike, do you want to try taking your microphone off and just talking? Hit it. Then unmute yourself. Unplug the microphone from the computer. This is bad when I'm giving technical advice.
You
I
could
can
also
still-
call in with the public comment number.
That's true.
I tell you what, why don't we put you at the end of the agenda, Mr. Brady? And we will go ahead with the audit presentation and leave about 5 minutes at the end for your item. All right, Mike? You're going to go into a different room?
He's going to walk across the street. Is that right, Mike?
Okay. We'll circle back to you. Give us, we're going to hear another item and you just sit tight. All right. Thank you. Okay, so let's go on to 3.3, the audit presentation for fiscal year 2019. Jan Schweitzer, hello. Rose Park neighborhood constituent, good to see you. You are muted, and if you can unmute yourself. And Lee, great. And Lee probably will introduce this, and then we will have Jan present. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, and thank you. I did want to say a few words before we have Jan Schweitzer from Anderson Zermulin start with the presentation. This is going to be a presentation on our fiscal year 2019 audit. Anderson Zermulin is a local and regional firm that's done our fiscal audits for a number of years now. We are actually up at the end of our contract, but have received permission from the mayor via our purchasing policy guidelines to enter into another year with Anderson Zermulin. It's been a bit hard to get off an RFP during quarantine and so forth, but they're a well-respected firm. They are approved by the state. Any audit firm that a municipality uses has to be approved by the State Department of Administration. And AZ, Jan will go into this a bit, but they do actually 3 audits for 5 organizations for the city. So one audit is the entire city, and that includes the audit of the Tourism Business Improvement District and the Business Improvement District as 2 of our component units. And then they do 2 more audits for the other 2 component units that folks are more familiar with, and that is our Parking Commission and Redevelopment Agency. They audit our internal control procedures and financial statements, and those financial statements get combined with the auditor's report in a report called the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. I know we're too acronym heavy, but we do call it the CAFR, the C-A-F-R. And all of the CAFRs for, I believe, more than a decade are on the city's website for folks viewing. Jan's report's going to be pretty high level, pretty 1,000 feet up. And if folks would like to actually get into more detail at any time, I'm happy to submit a follow-up referral so we could have more detailed questions if people have, want to get into the nitty-gritty. Additionally, I want to encourage city council members to reach out to me with specific questions. And that's everything I have to say. And thank you, Jan.
All right. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes? Cool. All right. You never know. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So let's see. Oh, it's saying it's failed to start. So I'm not sure what's going on. It's not letting me share my screen for whatever reason.
I know that the presentation was emailed out to us earlier today.
Okay. Yeah, it's just giving me an error code, so it's not letting me do that. So I don't know if all of you have access to the presentation, because if you do, then go ahead, Lee.
Lee?
I just wanted to say that I have it up on my screen, so I'll try to see if I can share.
Okay, I think we need to be able. I think we need to be able to see it on Zoom because it's very hard to discuss this without the graphics for the public.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Lee.
Doesn't one of them need to be a presenter? Ah, there we go.
Oh, there we go.
Perfect. Okay. So Leah, I guess you're the driver of my boat. I'll let you know when we go to the next page. So as Lee was saying, this is the exit conference. This was originally supposed to be in person, which I usually come to the city council chambers and present this in person. But it was also supposed to be a couple of months ago before COVID hit. So I appreciate you all being on what's probably your 100th Zoom meeting of the week. That's similar to what I go through. But thank you all for being here. And as Lee was saying, we'll actually start processing the planning procedures for the next year's audit. So, which, the fiscal year ends coming up in a few days here. So go ahead and go to the next slide, Lee, if you will. Thank you. And this is me. I just wanted to kind of, lend a little humor here, doing my part to protect the community. And at the same time, I don't know if you guys can see the detail of the mask, but I ordered this one online and it's got some hearts in it so that I can spread the love at the same time. So that's my message for the community. Go ahead, Lee. Just a little humor. So here's the basic outline of the presentation today. And before we actually get into the numbers, I really want to thank Lee, Jesse, Dale, everybody in the finance office, everybody at the city. They're always very accommodating and very helpful. And this year seemed to go very, very smoothly in terms of communication and information sharing. So I really, really appreciate that. But we will go through each of these in turn as we go. So go ahead and go to the next one, Lee, if you will. Thank you. So the scope of this year's audit, being 2019's audit, it was unchanged from the prior year. We show here on this slide with the various auditing standards that we comply with. And in fiscal year 2019, the biggest point that I want to make is you guys the city gets federal funding, and this year there was a little over $2 million in federal funds expended, which was extremely stable from last year, pretty consistent with the amount of expenditures last year. And your grants typically don't vary much from year to year. Now this year, it might look a little different, or going forward, it might look a little different, but the funding streams typically tend to stay the same. The audit that we do includes all city funds, as well as the 4 component units that Lee was alluding to. So we do issue separate audit reports for Missoula Redevelopment Agency and Missoula Parking Commission. But for BID and TBID, that is the Business Improvement District and the Tourism Business Improvement District, we don't issue separate audit reports, but they are all included in the CAFR as discretely presented component units. And that's just a standard of presentation that we have to comply with based on various components or various traits of the component units. So I'll be providing an overview later in the presentation as it relates to those entities. For 2019, the city's major funds for 2019 were the general fund. The general fund is always a major fund, and the sewer fund, or the wastewater fund as it's being called, and the water fund. And I don't anticipate there being any changes to that going forward unless something else comes up that would throw those out of the major fund category. And what we mean by major funds is it's those that are presented separately from all the other city funds in the presentation of the report, but we also do additional procedures on those just to make sure that we're opining correctly on those major funds. Okay, go ahead and go to the next one. And as every year, there seems to be new standards that are released by the Government Accounting Standards Board. This year was no exception. The biggest one in the past couple of years was actually a few years ago was GASB 68, which was, and now we're up to 88, as you can see. So it kind of ratchets up each year because they go in numerical order. Some of them have more effects on the reporting and the financial statements than others. The 2 that were effective this year really didn't have, well, GASB 83, we didn't have anything that pertained to the city in terms of GASB 83, which is for asset retirement obligations. So that would be things such as municipal landfills or those types of things that by law have to be retired in a certain manner. So that would have had to have been disclosed and recorded. We went through the analysis along with management and finance and didn't determine that there was anything that was applicable at the city level. So there was nothing that affected the financial statements for that. The GASB 88 one was effective, and it did change just basically some verbiage. It didn't change any numbers or anything like that, but there was just additional clarification on what the funding, the borrowings that are in place look like. So there's just a little bit of a different verbiage in the footnotes. Okay, go ahead, Lee. All right, so here's an overall summary of the audit results, and we'll get into the numbers in a little bit, but first of all, our opinion on the financial statements was a clean or unmodified opinion. That's the best opinion you can get. We did identify one finding over financial reporting, and it was related to information supporting the financial statements and the financial statement closing process. And if you want more specifics on that, that is on page 351 of the CAFR, where we detail out what that support what that finding is. And essentially, basically, when we're auditing, we have to rely on the supporting documentation to tie up to the overall financial statements. And there were just some instances in which that didn't occur. And I do know that Lee and her folks did a management kind of comment in terms of what their response to that finding was. And I believe they're implementing it as we speak, or shortly thereafter, shortly after we did the audit. I think they had addressed that. So if you want more detail on that, Lee can speak to that separately, or perhaps we can just answer questions on that at the end of the report or the exit here. Okay, let's see. One thing we did have to do is we did have to reissue our original report. There was a calculation error when the final PDF was done where a row was dropped off, so things weren't footing, and the state goes through and actually foots all the statements. And so we just had to reissue because of that. Not a huge deal. It was just a conversion issue upon finalization of the PDF. And then there were no findings related to the major federal programs this year. We did the home and the highway planning and construction grants, the transportation grants. So that was the bulk of the funding, and there were no issues that we found. Go ahead, Lee. All right, so what we're going to do in the following slides, I'm going to review with you some various financial statement highlights, and the majority of this information that I show on these slides, which will be in graphical format as we go forward, is basically from the statistical section of the annual report that shows the trend information. And I like to do it over a specific period of time. So I typically do it over 10 years since we have that much information. And as a preface to these slides, I really need to remind you that the city's financial statements are really presented in two different ways. It's very important to recognize this. First, there are the government-wide statements, which present the city's financial condition and operating results on a full accrual basis. And for those of you without accounting terms or background, not to worry. It's basically just presenting in some ways similar to what nonprofit or commercial organizations would report on a balance sheet or an income statement. So it's trying to really give an overall view of the city as a whole as if it were operating as a commercial business, okay? So there's some adjustments that have to be made from the presentation piece to get it to that presentation. The second set of financial statements is on the traditional fund basis of accounting, where major funds are presented separately and all other funds are combined. And so that's kind of just very important to keep in mind. And so these slides that I'm going to be going through in the next few depictions of the graph, please keep in mind these present the city's financial information only. That is, they exclude MRA and MPC, okay? So, or actually the component units as a whole. So we're just looking at the city's piece. And really, I also really encourage you to look at the management's discussion and analysis, because that's a really, really good depiction of the overall view of the year based on what management sees happened in 2019. Okay. All right, go ahead, Lee. All right, let's see. Sorry, I'm on the wrong slide. Okay. All right. So here, what we're looking at here is the net position by fund type for the past 10 years, again, on the full accrual basis of accounting. So this is the government-wide piece where it's drawing in information as if you're looking at a commercial business or a not-for-profit business. So it's on the full accrual basis of accounting. And so what this means is that capital assets, including infrastructure, and all of that net of depreciation is included in these graphical numbers here. So you can see that net position increased in 2019. That amount that it increased was about 46 million, primarily to the net investment in capital assets and a decrease in the unrestricted portion of net assets. In other words, there was a smaller negative unrestricted amount in 2019 of the unrestricted portion of net assets. So, and again, it should be noted that this depicts all city funds, government funds, enterprise funds, not just the general fund. So just keep that in mind when we're looking at that one. And if you want to know where that's coming from on the capper, that's page 23 in the capper. Okay, go ahead, Lee. All right, fund balances. So this graph shows fund balances on the traditional fund accounting model for the past 10 years. And this is broken out by general fund, which is blue, and all other funds, which is the red. In 2010, there was a decrease in fund balances. There was a decline in expected revenues during that year, particularly in the fee-based services related to the economic environment, planning and engineering fees, business licenses, those types of things, and also investment earnings and police fines. And through 2016, there was a trend of building back up that blue part of the bar. One thing to note that in 2017, the decrease shown in the general fund, the blue bar, was primarily due to a restatement that was done for the capital leases that were related to the CIP fund, the Construction in Progress Fund, and certain other funds that affected the balances. And in 2018, general fund revenues were higher than expected through the receipt of fire revenues and building and development permit revenues. So 2019 remained relatively flat for the general fund, and other funds decreased about $970,000, which is primarily a function of just basically the revenues and expenditures for those funds comprising that category. Okay, go ahead. All right, here we see the breakdown. Sorry, I'm calling off my daughter. Here we see the breakdown of the city's revenues in its fund financial statements, broken out by general fund and other funds over the past 10 years. And just as a reminder, these are governmental funds only. That includes not only the general fund, but special revenue, debt service, and capital projects funds. The revenues used in this graph don't include other financing sources such as transfers in and issuance of debt, primarily since those can vary so much year to year and could skew trends as a result. Please keep in mind that property taxes, as we all know, it provides the base for general government operations and are supplemented by other sources such as state shared revenues, interest, and other sources. General fund revenues in total decreased when compared to 2018 by about $1.5 million, which is about 3%. And that's primarily due to a decrease in taxes and assessments and charges for services. Revenues for all other funds increased by about $4 million, or 18%, and that's primarily due to the Road and Park District 1, as well as Fort Missoula revenues, among others. Okay, go ahead. Okay, here we see expenditures on a fund basis, broken out by general fund and all other funds over the past decade. The expenditures used in this graph do not include other financing uses, such as transfers out, primarily since, again, those can vary so much year to year and can really skew the results. Total expenses in 2019 in the general fund decreased about 6.1 million or 11%. The change in all other funds was a decrease of about 8.8 million or 46%. And the biggest changes there were in culture and recreation and public works, and can be attributed to where the Park District number 1 and Road District number 1 were being reported in the prior year versus the current year. So there was just a reclassification of where those were reported. Okay. This graph shows the mill levies over the past 10 years. This year, there was a decrease in city mills, an increase in county mills, and the others, which include schools, state, and transportation, basically remained flat. So overall, this graph gives a good depiction of each category and their changes over the years. And overall, total mills decreased about just less than 0.5% over the prior year. Here we see the change in taxable value for the city over the past 10 years. You can see that it remained pretty flat when compared to the prior year, which you can see on this graph between the blue and the red between 2018 and 19. So this just gives a really interesting picture of how it's fluctuated over the years. Go ahead, Lee. And then this one is always an interesting graph to look at. I've got this one and the one on the next page. But the debt margin here, what that represents is the limit as to how much general obligation debt the city can have. This is capped at 2.5% of the assessed value of taxable property. So that cap for 2019 was about 206 million. And the general obligation debt for 2019 was about 5.5 million. So when you compare that to what you can borrow, that represents about 3% of that capped amount. And I'll explain that a little bit further on the next slide. This is actually an excerpt from the CAFR itself, but to help put this into context a little bit more, state statute, again, sets the legal debt limit at 2.5% of the total assessed value of taxable property. So the margin will increase as taxable values increase and as debt continues to be paid down. So if new general obligation bonds are issued, the margin would then decrease commensurate with the increase in the bond balances outstanding. So again, it just depends on the taxable values and the amounts of the debt outstanding. Okay, so auditing standards also require that we report certain matters regarding the audit to those charged with governance, which is this committee. Our letter to governance, which was in a separate communication, addresses the matters that are listed on this slide. So I'm just going to go over them briefly with you. Auditor responsibilities are not only outlined in our engagement letter when we engage with the city to do the audit, we also do outline basically what our responsibilities are in this particular letter as well. What standards we comply with, what our responsibilities are versus what management responsibilities are and whatnot. We discussed the plan, scope, and timing during the planning phase primarily with management and with the finance folks to make sure that we're including everything we need to, make sure that we're addressing all of the risks that might pertain to any changes that happen. We'll be looking specifically at COVID-related stuff for this next year, just because, you know, there's a lot of changes that may have happened because of COVID with remote working and controls and all of that kind of stuff. So we'll make sure that we address that when we're planning this next one for fiscal year 2020. We talk about any new accounting policies and outline what those are. As I had indicated on an earlier slide, there were 2 standards that were effective for fiscal year 19, which was GASB 83 and GASB 88. That is also outlined in that letter. We, if there are any significant audit findings, we would outline them in the letter as well. There were no difficulties in performing the audit. There were no uncorrected misstatements. And what I mean by that is if we go through our audit procedures and we find you know, misstatements that we think need to be made, in other words, adjustments to make the financial statements more materially correct, then we would propose those. And in certain cases, management can elect not to record those. But we found none in this particular case. Other information included in the CAFR is just additional supplementary information, such as the schedule of expenditures of federal awards, and other information such as the combining schedules. We have to include that in there as well. no disagreements with management, and management is required under our auditing standards to provide us with certain representations, which they do so at the end of the audit in the letter that they sign. And again, that's just required in its boilerplate language primarily. And to our knowledge, there was no consultations with other accountants. And what this is referring to is in certain cases, if there's a disagreement regarding something that we're finding during the audit, sometimes folks might go out and shop for other opinions, but that didn't happen in this case. It was a very clean and very smooth audit, in my opinion. Go ahead, Lee. Okay, as noted before, and as Leo had kind of alluded to as well, the city's CAFR also includes the activities of its separate component units. We audited MRA and MPC around the same time as the city. We always do that around the same time. And we issued separate reports on each of those. And in both cases, we issued clean audit opinions for MRA and MPC, and there were no findings for internal controls for either of them. Go ahead, Lee. The Business Improvement District is also presented in the city's CAFR as a discrete component unit, which is how MRA and MPC are also presented, but we don't issue any separate reports on Business Improvement District. We do some additional procedures because we have to opine on that particular entity separately, and there were no internal control findings. So basically, it's part of the overall city audit, no internal control findings. And that's the same with the Tourism Business Improvement District. Looking forward, so here's one that we usually, like on this slide, when we look forward, it's usually GASBs that are going to be in effect, or accounting standards that are going to be in effect that are going to affect something. In other words, make you do more work or something. This one actually allows a little bit of breathing room, which we don't get very often. So this one was recently issued, and this one actually delays effective dates for a number of recent and upcoming standards. So as we talked about, the first two that are listed here, GASB's 83 and 88, we already implemented those, or management already implemented those for fiscal year 19. However, this particular standard would have delayed that effective date had those not been implemented. There are no new ones to my knowledge that will affect this upcoming audit for 2020, which is the first time in several years, like I can remember saying that. And for the ones going forward, the only one that will likely be a big deal for the city is a lease standard. And we've been talking about that with Lee and Jesse for quite a while. And of course, we'll keep them posted as to any further information that comes out on that when the time gets closer. But that's going to affect all entities, not just governments. That's been kind of in the works in the private industry sector for quite some time. So it's going to affect a lot of folks. And that's all I have for my presentation. Hopefully that made sense. And thank you, Lee, for driving that boat on the presentation slides. So I'll entertain any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much. First of all, Jordan, if we can borrow a few minutes from LUP, I'm going to ask for that now.
Yeah, that's fine. We've got plenty of time in LUP.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm going to actually have the slide for public comment on the audit put up right now. If we can put the informational slide with the phone numbers up, I'll put that information up so that people can be calling in. We will do questions from council and then take public comment. But in the meantime, the information for public comment access is phone number 253-215-8782, meeting ID 960-049-3694. So thank you. If we want to take that slide down, we will have a few questions from council and then call from public comment. And this is an informational item only. This is our annual audit report. Jan has given it for the last few years, and it's always great overview information, not only the city's finances, but to make sure that all of our practices are good and everything is where it should be, and we are accounting for everything. So I have Ms. Merritt, Ms. Sherrill, and then Ms. Anderson.
I was just going to take pity on Brian. I saw him trying to raise his hand, but he's still listed as a co-host on the participants thing, so he apparently can't raise his hand. So I'll turn it over to Brian.
Thank you, Brian. Sorry for not seeing that earlier.
No, thanks, Julie. I don't think Jan could probably do the presentation without me wanting to highlight the debt margin part. So thanks for the explanation on that. I don't know if you could go back to that. Actually, don't worry, it's not necessary. Let me restate what I believe to be the case there, as I do every year, and correct me if I get it wrong. There's a statutory limit by Montana law around the limit that we could have in general obligation debt. I believe that statutory limit is 2.5%, and we are at 2-point-something% of that statutory limit, I believe. And I just restate that and want to restate that to always highlight, because sometimes there is a sense in the public that we are drowning in general obligation debt or something like that. And if I stated that correct, it goes to the point that we are in a low single digit level of general obligation debt, even relative to the statutory statutory cap. Did I get that right, Jan?
Yeah, so yes. In a different way to phrase that is you're well below what you could borrow. So let's just say it that way. So your cap is 206 million. You're at 5.5 million. So you could borrow up to 206 million.
As with most of the things I say, that's a much better way to say it. So thank you.
Yeah. So you're well below that.
Thanks for bringing up that point, Brian. I was also going to highlight that. And I think that you're right. I periodically hear there's a perception that we have tons of debt. Well, we do have debt for the condemnation of the water company and the water entity. That is an enterprise fund. That debt is completely serviced by the water rates and is not serviced by property taxes. So there are different silos. And in terms of our general fund, general obligation debt, we have extremely small amount there. Ms. Cheryl and then Ms. Anderson.
Actually, my question was about the debt margin, and so I think it's just been answered. Thank you.
Ms. Anderson.
I also was going to talk about the debt margin because I do think that that's a really important point. And I love it when Lee, sometimes in her presentations tries to kind of use like household, like, real world, for all of us who do not speak Jan speak, kind of like, your credit card limit is X and you only are using so much. And I think that, we are in uncharted territory with a global pandemic and the subsequent, recession. And I think that it gives me comfort to know that we are in a really good financial position. The slide that I also thought was really interesting was the slide that kind of showed the income and the breakdown of the different taxing jurisdictions. I think that that is also something that is important to highlight, that especially, as Jan said, property taxes are the predominant source of funding for municipalities. And within that, there are several different taxing jurisdictions. And she was able to highlight that from 2018 to 19, I believe that the city's portion actually went down, whereas the other schools stayed the same and the county went up, which I think is really important to highlight. And I think that, the folks in the greater public may not have a perception of kind of what all goes into their property tax bills and how that money gets divvied up. And so I really appreciate you highlighting that. And so my question is that graph also within the CAF or in the information that kind of helps feed in to create that graph there?
Yes, that I don't have the specific page, but there is a statistical table that shows what those are.
Right. And then to kind of also compound, I think it was the graph either before or after, before after that also highlighted the kind of, the Department of Revenue's evaluations and how there seemed to be a big jump in 2017. But I think it's also really important to highlight that that was the first year that the Department of Revenue changed from a 6-year evaluation cycle to a 2-year evaluation cycle. So previous to that, every 6 years is when your home would be reevaluated. And if there was an increase, that increase would be sort of portioned out over a 6-year period. And now we're in every 2-year evaluation cycle to be hopefully more reactive if we see a downturn in the market, but also there seemed to be a big increase in that year, and that graph I think highlighted that. So is that also in the CAFR as well?
Yeah, all of that stuff came from the statistical section in the CAFR.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Last question, Ms. Vasika, and then we will call for public comment on this informational item.
Yes, thank you. I was just writing down the numbers, and I missed one. So the debt cap is at 206 million. And what number are we at currently?
5.5.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's all I needed.
Great, thanks. I will call for public comment. I am not seeing anyone in the waiting room, and we are actually over time, and we have one more small item to hear. Well, not small, but a short item, hopefully. So not seeing anyone in the waiting room, we are going to thank you, Jan and Lee, first of all, and we will, thanks so much for all of your work on this. We are going to hear our last item, which is the health insurance stop loss agreement. Hi, Jan.
Bye.
Mike Brady, are you somewhere in the house? If you, oh, voila, there he is. Let's get your mic unmuted and tell us what this item is all about.
All right, are we working now?
Lovely.
All right, thank you. Sorry about the communication problems there. The referral today before you is, are we working now?
We can hear you, so I think on our end it looks good.
The other room had trouble hearing me, so.
Nobody can hear it on the TV. It has to be turned on.
How do you turn it on?
So a green light.
Hang on.
Okay,
folks.
is that working? All right. The referral today is to approve and authorize the mayor to sign an agreement with Relias, our life insurance company, in the amount of $893,837.28. What this is the new year stop loss agreement for our self-funded health insurance plan. Earlier in April, Allegiance, our benefit plan manager, went out for quotes on this, as they do each year. And they, the current carrier that we have came back with an increase of over $300,000 for the year. One of the other carriers was, one of the other quotes was $200,000. And then this same company was $125,000 increase. So in looking at claims experience and our stop loss experience, we discussed with administration and as well with our advisors with Gallagher and whatnot on options that are available. And so in doing so, we discovered, or we received additional quotes to move from $140,000 when our stop loss would kick in would be $140,000, and we're moving to $160,000, which will reduce our premium to an increase for this coming year of $4,138. The reasoning behind that was that as of the end of April, we were 13% lower on our claims paid than we were this time last year. And we were 77% lower on our stop loss coverage that had kicked in. So the current quote is for a $160,000 limit for claim when the stop loss will kick in. And instead of the 140, all other aspects of the insurance will be the same as last year.
Thanks, Mike. And this is, it has ReliaStar Life Insurance Company, but I just wanted to clarify, correct me if I'm wrong, this is our health insurance coverage, and I'm kind of looking upon it as an umbrella policy. Basically, if we go beyond a certain amount, this kicks in to help with excess catastrophic coverage. Is that correct?
Correct. Individual claims that go above that 160,000, then this insurer will come in to pay for that claim.
Great. Sandra, did you have a comment?
Oh, I think this is a great idea. I'd be happy to make the recommended motion.
Thank you. That motion is in order. And Sandra, you're the insurance expert. I was looking for you to correct my vernacular if that was incorrect, but
I wouldn't call myself an expert, but I think that you did a great job explaining that.
Okay, we have our umbrella. All right, Heidi.
Thanks. So I have a question about, I guess, bringing our plan year in line with other open enrollment periods that are not that of the city. And I know that on the Employee Health Benefits Committee, the stop loss insurance is the thing that comes up as kind of locking us into, I guess, the June to June period, as opposed to having it open up in November, December, when most insurance companies have their open enrollment period. And I know that this, there weren't too many comments during this year's open enrollment period about this like disconnect, but can you maybe speak to maybe what the costs would have been to lock into an 18 month or a 6-month stop loss policy so that we can align with other insurance open enrollment periods?
So we have been looking at changing the plan year, and we are planning to do that. The problem with the stop loss is the 18-month period of time is hard to get a quote for, but we can get a better rate and quote for a short period. So starting now, we'll have a 12-month normal period and start planning for that short 6-month period so that we're about 1.5 years away from being on that calendar year you discussed.
Great. I am borrowing time from LUP committee. So we have a motion on the floor. I'm going to call for public comment on this item. If we could post that information quickly. And I'll read off the phone number to call in. It is 253-215-8782, meeting ID 960-049-3694. Please call in. We'll give that a little bit of time. Not seeing anyone in the waiting room to give public comment, we will do a roll call vote.
And Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Becerra?
Yes.
Contos?
Yes.
Harp?
Yes.
Hess?
Yes.
Jones?
Yes.
Merritt?
Yes.
Cheryl?
Yes.
Vasika?
Yes.
Von Lossberg?
Yes.
West?
Yes.
Unanimous in favor.
That will go on the consent agenda. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Jordan, for letting me borrow some time. And we will be adjourned.
Thank you.
And just so everyone knows, we'll plan to start LUP at 3:05.
And if the admin staff can make Jordan the host, I would appreciate that. Because I don't know that I have that capability. The co-host, I mean. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Is our committee staff ready with eScribe and Zoom?
Just a couple minutes.
Okay, great. Can you also, when you get a chance, remove Gwen and Brian as co-hosts so they can raise their hand?
We're ready.
Great, thanks. We'll get started in just a moment. Okay, good afternoon. I'm going to call the Land Use and Planning Committee to order. This, of course, is a virtual meeting, and so we'll be conducting all of our business by video conference. We do have an option for public comment. That information is on the screen right now. I'm going to read a number just so that it's audibly available for anyone with visual impairments. That number is area code 253-215-8782, or toll free from a landline 888-475-4499. When prompted, you'll enter meeting ID 960-049-3694. If anyone wants to call in to give comment, you can do so now, and I will monitor the comment waiting area throughout the meeting. You're also welcome to call and leave a voicemail, 406-552-6012, and that will be received by all the council members. So our first item is roll call, and we have, well, if we could have the clerk call the roll, that'd be great.
Stacy Anderson.
Present.
Marta Becerra.
Present.
John Contos.
Here.
Heather Harp.
Present.
Jordan.
Present.
Gwen Jones.
Present.
Julie Merritt.
Present.
JC Ramos. Amber Sherrill.
Present.
Sandra Beseca.
Present.
Brian Losberg.
Here.
Heidi West.
Here.
Okay, great. We have no one in our public comment lobby. We have minutes to approve from our meeting on June 3rd. Without objection, those will be approved. Okay, so we have just one agenda item today. This is our annual Title 20 update. For the benefit of our new members, Title 20, of course, is our zoning code, and any updates to Title 20, any updates to zoning under state law need to go through a little bit of a more detailed, or a little bit more of an involved process rather than other ordinance changes. They need to go to the planning board in addition to going through the city council public hearing process. So what we do is group those amendments. The development services staff will gather proposed amendments throughout the year, and we'll group those amendments together and run them all through the process. So this could be anything from a minor maintenance to a minor policy change, but generally speaking, these are relatively minor changes that are fairly straightforward. Despite that, there's an incredible amount of work that goes into this. There's a lot of staff effort that goes into assessing what is and isn't working, and how to make improvements in order to make our zoning code more functional for all of our stakeholders. So we have a number of development services staff here today. We have Jen Gress, who has done the majority of the heavy lifting on all of these code changes. We also have Laval Means, and I believe we have Don Veru on the line, and then Jim Nugent here as well. So we've got a lot of resources here today, and I'll turn it over to Jen. I guess first of all, the one thing I'll note is that this process starts today with council. It will continue for the next couple of months, and so today is a high level overview. It is just a check-in to make sure that we're on the right track. And then following today, this will get sent to the planning board, and there will be an agency and public comment period. And then after that, it'll come back to council later this summer or early this fall. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jen.
Thank you. And yes, so as Jordan is saying, this is our annual update. It's a little slow this time. And it is Title 20 for the record. I am Jen Gress with Development Services, and I need to ask the question if my presentation is coming through.
It is.
Okay, perfect, thanks. So today's discussion again will cover proposed amendments to update Title 20. I'll provide some key topics, an overview of the amendments, and describe next steps. You have a summary list of amendments as part of this referral, and I'll be referencing item numbers throughout the presentation. I'm not planning to go through amendments in details today. There'll be an opportunity for that when we return from planning board, but I'll be available at the end of this presentation, and I'm always available by email if you have questions. So the city zoning ordinance includes a mandate to maintain and update the text of the ordinance on a regular basis. This process of regular review and updates allows staff to collect potential amendments and propose changes in an efficient way, while also complying with all the amendment procedures set forth in Chapter 2085 of the zoning code. Part of updating the regulations includes keeping current with city guiding policies and best practices. This project supports the city's strategic framework by continuing to refine land use regulations that provide predictability. In the past, we've had as many as 50 amendments, as few as 13, and this year's package proposes 40 amendments in 13 chapters. You'll be hearing about general topics of change and the general direction those changes should go. The proposed list of potential changes is not set in stone yet. So as we work to address specific issues such as creating consistency with other departments and clarifying the notification section, we might find that some of the amendments shift a little bit. So please remember, you'll see a detailed list of amendments prior to your public hearing later in the year. Overall, the amendments are intended to implement several recommendations from the housing policy, create consistency between divisions in development services, focus review of conditional use projects on the specific use, consolidate and refine the notification process, and address regulations that may be out of date, inefficient, or in error. I'll be describing the amendments in groupings and will refer to the numbers in the summary list as I go. So amendments proposed to implement recommendations from the housing policy will mostly occur in the accessory dwelling unit chapter and include amendments 2 through 6. These remove several regulations that may inhibit a proposed ADU. They include removal of the annual permit, owner occupancy requirement, additional parking, and the requirement that an ADU be a minimum of 350 square feet. Amendment number 6 will simplify the height of an ADU to a maximum of 22 feet. Amendments 7 and 8 remove the term by right and expired language regarding illegal ADUs. So previously, amendments to Title 20 have made accessory units a permitted use in all zoning districts, so the term by right is no longer needed. And when ADUs were permitted in all districts, council agreed to have a grace period allowing owners of existing illegal ADUs a limited time opportunity to comply with the new regulations by registering and bringing it up to code with no penalties. Well, this grace period has expired and the language needs to be removed. Amendment 9 addresses changes in the parking chapter by removing language requiring a parking space for an ADU, and also replaces the word subsidized with affordable housing. Language will be included to allow an existing accessory structure that may be non-conforming because it's placed on a parcel line to be replaced, and will allow existing or new structures an opportunity to expand along that parcel line subject to conditions. And this is in order to help encourage an ADU. And this model is an approach that we took for improvements to existing non-conforming primary structures. Amendment 11.
Jen, can I stop you right there? I think we have a question on the ADU slide or an idea. Gwen Jones.
Thank you. I understand this is our first time hearing the proposed Title 20 cleanup, and it's going through a process. So I just wanted to put a couple of thoughts out there. I think a lot of it is great, but for example, in the University District where there is a RPPP, residential parking permit program, and parking is already insufficient, I'm thinking we might need a carve out for RPPPs that ADUs will still have to provide a parking spot. So I wanted to put that in the hopper for staff to chew on and toss around, because we seem to have an issue in that neighborhood, and I hesitate to not accommodate parking.
Thanks. Jen, let me actually ask a preference question here. I think we talked about it, and I think I may have diverged from what we talked about. Would you prefer it if we hold questions and suggestions till the end, or do you want us to kind of interrupt as we go through?
Originally, I was thinking that I'd get to the end of it.
That's what I was thinking too, and I just immediately didn't do that. So let's, without objection, let's hold any more questions until the end, and let's and maybe just make a note of a slide number if you do have a question or a suggestion. So,
thanks.
Okay, thanks.
So we're still coordinating with the Missoula housing policy. Amendment number 11 proposes to replace the current definition of subsidized, which is in the parking chapter, with the specific definition of affordable housing being used by the housing office, which will more specifically address Missoula's individual needs. The only place the term affordable housing currently occurs in the code is in the PUD overlay section, so we need to update that section as well. And amendment number 1 does that by amending the criteria in the PUD overlay district to meet the proposed definition of affordable housing. Amendments are being proposed in Title 20 that will create consistency with existing engineering terms and address potential amendments between the engineering and building divisions, which will shift ADA review to the building division. So amendments 12, 13, and 15 propose to change terminology in specific locations of Title 20 from driveway to driveway approach to match terminology used in engineering depending on whether the area being regulated is in the right-of-way or on a private parcel. References to engineering review of ADA requirements will be replaced with a reference to the building division because, again, of potential amendments to engineering and building rules. The building division has the ability to review ADA issues through the International Building Code, and those amendments are shown in 14, 17, and 18. And Amendment 16 makes two changes. The first will clarify when a driveway is involved in a project, the engineering division needs to prove that driveway prior to issuance of a zoning compliance permit or a building permit. And the second will remove language addressing maximum grade of a driveway from Title 20 while maintaining it in the engineering. Amendments to the conditional use process are being proposed with the goal of focusing the conditional use approval process on the proposed land use and relying more on existing regulations and other review processes for associated design of a project. Proposed Amendment 19 will remove the necessity of providing very specific elevation and landscape plans, letting an applicant provide general information about site layout and design. And while the intent of these amendments is to generalize the review of a conditional use project, the section still needs to be clear that the entirety of Title 20 and any approved conditions to a project still need to be adhered to, and that's shown in Amendment 21. Amendments 20 and 23 clarify review process. Most of the factors to be considered are more appropriately placed under the review criteria section, and cross-references will be added. And Amendment 22 really sums up what the changes to the conditional use chapter are doing, which is amending the language to support a more general approach to review and help implement plans and policies adopted by Missoula. So the next section is the sign chapter. Proposed Amendment 24 will clarify where dynamic display signs are permitted by incorporating Zoning Officer Opinion 20-01, which is addressing a gap in the reference to existing zones, and will remove the prohibited location section since we also have a where allowed section, focusing the regulations on where the signs are permitted, helping to remove confusion. Building graphics only need to be reviewed by one decision-making body, and Amendment 25 clarifies that. And the last sign change will remove the requirement that staff provide identification tags with every sign permit. The identification tags have not proven useful, and so the language will be removed. Noticing procedures are being updated and requirements are proposed to be consolidated into one location in Chapter 2085, Review and Approval, resulting in ease of use and consistency of notification procedures. Notice requirements will be moved from the Town Home Exemption Development section into Chapter 2085 with Amendment 27. Amendments 29 and 31 encompass a majority of the changes regarding notice by taking the notification pieces out of multiple sections of Title 20 and reorganizing them into a new notice section in the review and approval chapter. The administrative adjustment notification will be amended to be consistent with the timeline of all other notice in Title 20. So as I noted a minute ago, Amendment 29 and 31 contain the majority of amendments updating the notice section. And within that language, staff is proposing to remove the need to use certified mail for notification. The process has proven time consuming for staff, expensive, and most of all, ineffective. Amendment 29 will also create consistency in notice by requiring notification of owners within 150 feet of a proposed project when mail notice is required, and will include an intent statement at the beginning of the notice section. Amendment 28 removes the requirement of a landowner to notify surrounding parcels of their intent to apply for a tourist home. This process has also proven to be time-consuming for staff and frustrating for the applicant while delaying projects. And staff will continue to notify the surrounding parcels of an approved tourist home application. The last group of amendments is a miscellaneous category and includes various amendments without a common theme. So the first two changes occur in the overlay district chapter and will incorporate the use light equipment sales rentals into the Airway Boulevard Corridor subdistrict of the Missoula Development Park overlay zone, and clarify how to calculate the material coverage of a development going through a design excellence review by reflecting current practice. And those are amendments 33 and 34. The adoption of Title 20 in 2009 removed the need for new enterprise commercial overlays by making EC uses either permitted or conditional. And in 2018, the existing older EC overlays were removed from the zoning map. So the regulations need to reflect this change, and Amendment 35 will remove irrelevant language. There's also been confusion about when a project is subject to the hillside protection regulations, and if the chapter, if it's subject to the chapter, which sections apply to which types of uses. And proposed Amendment 36 will clarify the applicability section of the hillside protection. Amendment 37 and 38 occur in the landscaping chapter and provide additional guidance for developers when they propose to include garden areas as part of their required landscaping in a multi-dwelling project, The landscaping chapter also has an exemption for meeting the letter of the chapter by allowing a landscape architect to create an alternate plan. This amendment asks for an explanation of how a proposed landscape plan provided by a landscape architect will meet the intent of the landscaping chapter. And the last two proposed amendments will allow design review board members to reside either in the city or outside the city limits, making recruiting and retention of these voluntary positions easier, and will include language in the use classification section allowing utility services to place on site any type of equipment necessary to allow the facility to function properly. So next steps for adoption of these Title 20 update amendments will be to finalize a draft of all proposed amendments and send them out for agency and interested party review and comment. And staff is incorporating a full month comment period this time for additional time for the community to consider the changes. We're also working closely with the housing and community development on this project. Staff hopes to attend a community forum meeting during the public comment period and will include the amendments on the city's new engagement Missoula.com website. A planning board public hearing will be held probably in August, and a city council public hearing will follow in the fall. So staff is recommending that council move to direct staff to distribute draft amendments for comment, conduct a planning board hearing, and then return to the city council for final consideration. And that concludes my presentation, and I am happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Great. Thanks, Jen. Okay, so I've got a speaker list going. The first person on it is Heidi, and then Sandra.
Hi, thanks. I'm going to go all the way back to slide 6, which was the changes to the ADU policy. And I guess I have some reservations about removing the owner occupancy requirements. I think that in a society, I suppose, that really generates wealth through attaining properties, and there is a real inhibition to people being able to enter into the market, I could see, you know, basically just people that are already landowners or homeowners just, you know, having more homes. And I think one of the things that's really nice about the current ADU regs is that somebody that owns it has to live on site. And it's a very, that means people are in the neighborhoods long-term. They're investing in their own property, not that home ownership is the end all be all. But I think this could have some unforeseen consequences that maybe aren't getting us towards our overall affordability goals in the community. And I think there should be maybe a little bit more conversation around that, or maybe some conditions of like, if you are going to be an absentee homeowner, then maybe that ADU needs to be affordable or something. Like, I think there could be an additional layer that gets us to, I think, what the goal is here, which is adding more units into our community and actually bringing down those rental prices. So I think I would love there to be maybe a little bit more conversation about this one.
Thanks. Sandra and then Amber.
Yes, thank you. I disagree. Well, I agree with the majority of the presentation. I'm happy with a lot of those regulation changes. But I do disagree with the language of changing subsidized to affordable housing. I would prefer it to be kept as subsidized housing. And then I also respectfully disagree with Ms. Jones' suggestion of requiring parking in RPP zones. I think that requiring a spot in those zones will probably make the ADU more expensive to build, and then in turn make the ADU more expensive to rent. So that's why I disagree with that. And then I also, with owner property rights, I respectfully disagree with Ms. West on having making it owner occupied preferred. Those are my thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Amber and then Gwen, and then Heather's next.
I'm sorry, I'm having lots of computer trouble today for some reason, so I missed part of what Ms. Jones said, but I think based on what Sandra just said, she was talking about the requirements when there are parking restrictions already, and I think I would agree with Ms. Jones, and I think that's something we need to consider because parking is very, very hard in the university area. Also, I'm wondering, can you bring us back to slide 6, possibly? I was keeping track of my questions based on the number of the slides.
Yeah, one moment, please.
And I think one of my questions that's on that slide is around the height and what change in the height. I know we put what was the height requirement?
The requirement currently is, let me look real quick so I get it right. It's connected to the primary structure. Is that the slide that you wanted to look at?
I'm just, so the height required, maybe that's it, 22 feet. Okay, so sorry, it was 5 on the slide. So you're saying simplifying it to 22 feet. Can you explain what change that is?
Right. Right now, the maximum height for a detached accessory dwelling unit is 22 feet, or the height of the primary building, whichever is less. So we're changing it to 22 feet, and that will be the same as any other accessory structure.
Okay, but it could be taller than the other house.
Pardon?
Like it's not based, it has no basis on what the existing structure is?
That's what's being proposed, correct.
Okay, could we go to, do you mind if I ask another question, Jordan?
No, go right ahead.
Could you go to slide 12? Okay. Oh, this is the, can you expand on the sign graphic section here? What are, I think I missed some of that.
Number 25, is that the one you're asking about?
Amber, are you joining us via AM radio?
Do I sound terrible? I'm actually in the Hal Fraser conference now. And not working.
We can hear you. There's just a little static.
So right now, what the regulations are saying is that building graphics may only be approved when the design review board determines that the building graphic will make a positive contribution to the building and surrounding area's appearance and will otherwise be in keeping with the intent of this ordinance. Well, we have other processes that graphics go through as well, such as the Public Art Committee. They'll review building graphics. And then as well, the new Design Excellence Overlay will also review building graphics. And so there really isn't a necessity for them to go through the design review board when they've already gone through a pretty specific process.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. I think that's it for right now. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So I have Gwen next and then Heather.
Thank you. Jen, if you could go to slide 14 on tourist homes. I think I understood what you said, but I just want to make sure there will still be notification to surrounding neighbors, 150 square or 150 foot radius, but the notification will be done by office development staff. Is that correct? That's a proposal.
Mostly, yeah. Right now, applicants of a tourist home are required to do their own notification of surrounding areas, and that process is proving to be complicated. They have an issue. A lot of times they don't have the right information. They can't get to the landowner. It delays the project. Staff is required, or they ask staff to help them. And so we're just removing that first step and maintaining the fact that staff will notify the area after the approval has been given.
Okay, that's great. Just as long as there's some type of notification so that neighbors have some idea of who to contact if there's a problem. That's the key. So great, just wanted to clarify that. And then going back to ADUs again. So I brought up the issue of parking within a parking permit program area. But the second thing, and you can help flesh out my knowledge of the ADU law, Jen, the second issue I just wanted to spot was currently our ADU law requires that if you build an ADU in a single family zone neighborhood, the ADU must match the architectural style and color scheme and cladding or skin of the main residential building to some degree. Is that correct? It's reviewed by staff, and you just can't put like a metal shed roof up next to a craftsman bungalow, correct?
Right, there are criteria that it needs to have. There are design guidelines, yes.
Great, okay, so I understand the whole concept of modifying the ADU law and making it easier and more streamlined. However, I would like staff to have a discussion regarding the proposal of keeping that criteria regarding the architectural style and color scheme, et cetera, keeping that requirement for single family zoned within a historic district. Because the whole point of a historic district is the integrity of the structures there. And I think we need to honor that. So I would like to put that caveat in there. And the last thought I had was, Heidi, I really appreciate your comment regarding owner occupancy. And I agree that is something that I would like to learn more about. And I bet that there is more information out there in the wide world regarding having owner occupancy versus not having owner occupancy and the long-term impacts of ultimately creating housing that is more affordable. So my mind is open on that, and I look forward to more information. And thanks for raising that point, Heidi.
Yeah, and I think, oh, Heidi, go ahead.
Can't hear
Heidi,
you.
you're muted.
I have technological issues like everyone. I think Lisa Biskevich actually spent this summer doing some work around ADUs through some additional Invest Health funding. And I don't know how that work ties into this work and the Housing Authority work, but it might be worth having some input. You know, if they have any input to add, it might be worth to bring it into this like connect it before we maybe make these changes.
Yeah, it's a great point. I know Laval has been very involved in this amendment process and is also on that Invest Health group. Maybe first, could we turn to we have Montana James here. Montana, would you be able to maybe weigh in from the standpoint of the housing office?
Yeah, of course. I have also worked with Lisa on the ADU work, and unfortunately, it's mostly gotten delayed because of COVID. That effort was really based on a trip to Portland that we were supposed to take in April, which did not happen. So I don't think that there's much more information there since it's mostly been on hold. But I know she is working on shifting that to a virtual convening with some folks from Portland who work in the ADU space. So it would look at design and kind of best policy practices, financing, some of those pieces. Did you want me to touch on any of the other comments, Jordan, in particular? Or?
Yeah, I guess particularly on the owner occupancy piece, as far as, I mean, I know that this is coming forward for some very specific reasons, and it would be great to tease those out a little bit more.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, in the housing policy passed last June, so about a year ago now, we do recommend removing the owner occupancy requirement for a few reasons. It presents some pretty significant barriers to actually being able to construct an accessory dwelling unit. One of those is the way that it limits financing opportunities for folks hoping to build an ADU. It at this point means that you either have to have the cash on hand to build that ADU in most cases, and that's not really a reality for most folks in Missoula. So that's part of the purpose of that, removing that restriction. Let's see what else. We've also found that there are some secondary effects when a property owner no longer resides on site. Say, we've heard from some folks that they work seasonally, are in another state for part of the year. That can remove a potential rental unit from the market for little or no community benefit. So that is another kind of key piece of the logic around removing this restriction. And I think Jen spoke a little bit to the administrative burden of the restriction as well on city staff for, I guess, essentially creating these additional barriers to folks who want to build units, and then the city staff administrative side of things as well as a challenge.
Great, thank you. Next, I've got Heather and then Julie.
Thanks, Jordan. Still on ADUs at this point. Jen, I was wondering, or even Montana, since council approved the notion of property owners being able to build ADUs by right, do we have some kind of numbers in terms of the number of ADUs that actually have come online, in particular in the university area, or as a whole throughout the city?
I don't have anything particular to the university area, but it's my understanding that over the last 2 years, each year, we've seen 5 being approved.
I'm sorry, folks, I'm working at my office today. Jen, could you repeat yourself?
It's my understanding that both the last 2 years have had each 5 ADUs approved.
I'm sorry, Jen, can you repeat that number? You said how many?
5.
5, okay.
5 last year, 5 the year before. So each year there's been 5.
Okay, great. That makes, I heard 85 and I was shocked. Okay, Heather, do you have additional questions?
I do. Okay, so I appreciate the clarification on the height because that has been one of the things that has really kind of made no sense to me, that a lot of these opportunities that present themselves oftentimes are small garages in people's neighborhoods, and they can't build an ADU because putting one on top of that garage would exceed the height of their primary residence. So I'm very thrilled to see that we're lifting that. But I am worried about removing, about the parking requirement. When I think about Gwen's comment about the RPPP, and I understand where you're coming from on that. People in that area have the ability to purchase a permit for the year for $25 per year so that they can have a parking space in front of their house. When I compare that to what the cost is of putting in a parking space, which roughly is $3,500 to $4,000 a piece, that adds on to the cost of the ADU. And that's where I get really kind of, I wonder why we only have 10 ADUs that have been built in the last 2 years. And maybe that's one of those reasons. Maybe not, but that's what we're gonna hopefully find out going forward. And I guess the other thing I wanted to just find out a little bit more from Sandra, if you could let us know why you prefer the language of using subsidized housing over affordable housing so that I have a better understanding of where you're coming from.
Yes, is that okay if I do that now, Jordan?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Because when I first looked into council and then all the language that are in the city things, affordable housing, it just kind of made it seem like that was in my naive years, it just made it seem like it was a cheaper part of town, not neighbor subsidized housing. And so I guess it just kind of is a better definition of what it would be, unless I have that completely wrong.
I think in this case, it's more that it's tying back to a specific definition within the housing policy, and maybe Jen or Montana, if one of you could maybe fill in a little bit more on that for me.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. That's basically the approach that we took. The term affordable housing appeared already in code, and it lines up more with the tier system that we're creating in the housing policy. And that carries with it several levels of affordability. So that's the logic behind kind of cleaning up and more consistently using the term affordable housing with those tiers associated with it in the definitions section of code.
May I follow up?
Yeah,
will there be a definition for what affordable housing means in the code then?
Yes, yeah. Okay. So in the definitions section, it will have the tiering and with the ranges of area median income indicated.
Okay, then I'm okay with that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay. Heather, do you have more, or are you done for now?
I am done for now. Thanks, Jordan.
Okay. So Julie is next, and then Mirta on deck.
Okay, two things that have kind of already been talked about at different times, but I just want to put my thoughts in there. I'm not really excited about the thought that the surrounding landowners are only going to get notice of a tourist home after it's a done deal. I can understand the difficulty of people figuring out how to do that notice, but I'm not really excited about making it easier for people to turn properties in our city into tourist homes. I think the Airbnbs are detrimental to our neighborhoods, so I'm not excited about making that easier for them. If they can figure out how to list their property on Airbnb or VRBO, I think they can figure out how to go onto the Montana Cadastral website and find people's addresses in order to send them notice. The other item I wanted to follow up on Heidi's idea about, in exchange for lifting the owner occupancy requirement on the ADU, of having a requirement instead for affordability of the housing, I think we should also have a prohibition of turning those units into tourist homes. If we're going to allow people to get out from under that owner occupancy requirement, we don't need to see more of those turned into short-term leases. That's my 2 cents. Thanks.
Thanks, Julie. So Mirta and then Gwen.
Thanks, Jordan. And thanks, Julie. I was thinking along the same line, so I'm glad you brought that up. I do have a question about the landscaping chapter. If you could put that slide up, Jen, that would be great. Mostly, I wanted to know right now, I think it's the last, second to last. Just wanted to know right now, I guess I forgot exactly how it works when you have a landscape architect sign off on a plan. Who then reviews that plan? Does it go to development services, or do we at any point check with our urban forester for ensuring that that plan matches what we have as requirements in terms of the types of trees or landscaping per the requirements? Okay. Right now, Martha, what I understand is that when a landscape architect provides an alternative plan that they feel like meets the intent of the regulations, then it's just accepted. I am not familiar with it going to the Parks Department. I could look into that, but I don't think it does. May I have a follow-up?
Go ahead.
So I think, yeah, if you could explore a little bit more about that topic, that would be great. I think it's important that we have whatever plan is submitted as part of our proposal be in line with what our urban forester has in the regulations. Thank you.
I could fill in a little bit of background from what I've heard as well. I know that as Jen was mentioning, that the exemption or the alternative compliance before was, I think there was possibility for abuse. So someone could submit an alternative compliance landscape plan that was stamped by a landscape architect. The landscape architect in that case is hired by the developer who is, who has a specific vision in mind, and that vision may not necessarily meet the objectives of our code for activity area or landscaping. And so my understanding is that this was actually brought forth by some area landscape architects who were kind of wishing to see what they saw as a bit of a loophole tightened up. So the intent statement allows it still allows for alternative compliance, but it makes the landscape architect, or it makes the applicant rather, just justify how the landscape plan meets the intent of the code. So they still have to meet all of the code elements, or if they are seeking the alternative compliance, they have to make the case for how it meets the intent of the code, if that helps.
It does, but I'm wondering who makes, I guess it's a matter of making sure that our code matches what, or is reviewed, or that we have the urban forester in some way weigh in on whether that is an appropriate plan.
So my understanding then is that whoever would be reviewing the landscaping plan for appropriateness would be reviewing the alternative compliance intent statement for appropriateness. And maybe Jen or Lavelle could correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I think that's my understanding of how that process would work.
And that is at development services, but it doesn't include the urban forester?
I can't speak to that. I don't know who's included in that review, but we can certainly find out.
Yeah, that's something that I'll need to look into for you, Mirtha. I don't know the details of that. I can ask.
Thank you.
Great. Mirta, do you have any additional questions?
No, that's all. Thank you.
Okay, great. So next, Gwen and then Amber.
Thanks. I just wanted to follow up a little bit. I think it's an interesting topic about parking in the university district, whether or not we need to add more spots. And I guess it's an issue of capacity. So I feel like it would be good to reach out to the parking commission and the parking commission director, since they're the ones that handle that issue, to see what their thoughts are on this in terms of getting more input. And regarding my comment about the ADU requirement and whether it should be kept for historic districts, regarding the style and architecture, et cetera, of an ADU, I think we should reach out to our historic preservation officer, since that's really a historic preservation issue. And I wanted to add, I really appreciated Julie Merritt's comment about tourist homes in terms of the ADU and removing the occupancy. I think that's an area that we can look at to tighten up. So if there are some ideas as this is pondered, I think that's really worthwhile. That's all.
Okay, thanks, Gwen. For the record, Julie Merritt had to leave and is no longer in the meeting. Amber and then Heidi. Oh, I'm sorry, Laval has a point to weigh in on that. Why don't you go ahead first, Laval?
Thank you. Just to make it clear, we're not changing the design standards, so we weren't proposing to take any of the design standards away. This is a change to the height requirement, and otherwise everything about the detached accessory dwelling unit is still the same way that it was, where it has to match and it has to have a relationship. I don't have the standards in front of me, but we weren't planning to make any changes to those standards.
Gwen, follow up.
So this only applies to single family zoned, of course, for an ADU. My understanding is that the architectural issues, the design, et cetera, takes staff review, and that is one of the increased costs. And that's what we're trying to limit. But no, you're not going that far with this proposal at this point in time.
Right, we're not removing design standards. Oh, sorry.
Pardon me?
Yeah, sorry, I jumped in without raising my hand.
Go ahead.
We're not proposing to remove any design standards. Those are still intact, unless you're thinking there needs to be something more or something less. That still stays there to guide the ADUs.
Okay, yeah, great. I think you've answered my question. It sounds like that section of the ADU law will remain as is, and there still will be staff review. You're just simplifying other aspects of it. Okay, all on the same page. Very good. Thank you.
Great. Amber and then Heidi.
I also wanted to say that I appreciate Julie Merritt's points about the tourist home. I think that if we are going to get rid of the owner occupancy piece, that the tourist home piece is going to be really important. And as I agree with her about the notification as well. I think that we're not trying to necessarily make that an easier thing for people to do. We're trying to solve a housing problem. Also, will you speak to, since I haven't been through one of these reviews yet, would you speak to what the public process is in a little more detail, and when public will have the opportunity to weigh in on at the different points in this process when they'll be able to weigh in?
Yeah, so right now what we're doing is coming to you today for a general overview, giving you an idea of this is what we're thinking. This is the process, or the thought process that we're having. And as soon as we get an okay from you guys saying, yeah, everything looks pretty good, we agree with mostly what you're doing, and you'll see more details later, then we will start the public outreach process, where we'll send out an agency and interested party review comment. And that's what's going to last for about a month. Once we get that back, we'll go to planning board. They'll have a public hearing. We'll get lots of comment from planning board. And then we'll be back to LUP in between planning board and city council with all the commenting that goes on with those processes. And then ultimately a city council public hearing. And we can take comments anytime from now on.
Thank you.
Lavelle?
We're planning a more robust time, well, adding time to the typical agency and public comment period for this time in our world, I think, but also because the topic of ADUs, I think, is pretty near and dear to a lot of people. And we're working closely with the housing department for comment and engagement, but we'll have the engagemissoula.com website up as well to be able to promote and seek comment through. There will be 2 pages, one that will be on the Title 20 amendments alone specifically and cover all of it. And then there is also an ADU web page that provides background, and we'll have a link between the two so that there will be ways through both those processes for people to see where we're at in the process, to see, to answer some FAQs, to be able to provide comment, and to see what, especially with related to ADUs, what does it look like now? What are other communities doing, et cetera? So a little more education on that as well through that ADU webpage.
I really appreciate that. I heard a lot about ADUs, during my campaign, and I also have heard from constituents about it since. So, and when you're looking through the land use planning as a novice, you see Title 20 and you don't know what that means, right? So, I mean, as far as if you're looking at the agendas, I want to make sure that they realize that this is a topic that's being discussed and being amended. So, thank you.
Can we get the public comment slide on the screen? Just so that those numbers are available. So we'll continue with council questions and comment, but wanted to provide the opportunity again for folks to call in. Again, area code 253-215-8782, meeting ID 960-049-3694. You can also call and leave a voicemail 552-6012. So we can move on. I have several more people on the speakers list, Heidi and then Sandra.
Thanks. So the first thing I wanted to say is that I really appreciate Montana's explanation of why the housing department supports the removal of owner occupancy requirements. And I think that those reasons make a lot of sense, but I also hope we can figure out maybe some way to integrate, Julie's comments and maybe limit those uses a little bit. And then as far as I have 2 things around landscaping, I think the city of Missoula's forester's comment is limited to boulevard trees right now. I know that when we had our landscaping plan reviewed for Lee Gordon, I think that is the only place where Mr. Boza engaged. And then I do have a question about I guess TED specifically in the landscaping plan. I think I know that when the NMCDC developed Lee Gordon Place, that had a landscaping plan, but if you're developing a TED and pulling individual single family building permits for that project, then there isn't an overall landscaping requirement. It has to do with like how you're pulling permits for it. And it's just an interesting dichotomy. And I don't know if there's a way to I don't know, maybe make sure that TED projects that are being pulled as single family homes also have adequate like green space over the whole project, if that makes sense. But it does seem to be, I was just surprised by that. I guess I'll leave it at that.
Sandra and Lavelle, go ahead.
We are in the process of reviewing the TED project process again, TED regulations again, along with the subdivision regulations. So if I can carry forward your concerns about green space in TEDs into this process that we're into now, which is sort of the general, what should we do to fix some of these things? And that awareness would be really helpful.
Thank you.
Great. Sandra and then Heather.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank Heather for more eloquently and putting a numerical value on the parking issue that I had earlier. That's what I was trying to get at, that for $25 for a permit versus thousands of dollars to put a driveway in. And then also, I would also like a good explanation of what the email that Jim just sent out. I got a little confused with that.
Yeah, so what Mr. Nugent is telling us is that this is a proposed city ordinance. And so since the city council is the legislative body that passes ordinances, there is the power of the council to amend it. I think what we're hoping here is that this is an initial kickoff that is a high level overview of what's proposed, and that development services can vet these projects for for public review and bring them back to us. But as Jim pointed out, it is an ordinance, and so there is the power to amend. Is that helpful?
Yes, that was very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, Heather.
Thanks, Jordan. This discussion has been really, really very worthwhile. So thanks for everybody chiming in. The topic I wanted to just touch on is this around design guidelines of making sure that a proposed ADU is constructed with the same envelope as the primary residence. And I think the intent is a good one, but I think we're always assuming that we have a good primary house to begin with, and that we're worried that a subsequent ADU is going to be constructed at a lesser quality or in contrast with the primary residence. And I'm not sure why that's such a big deal. But the other side of this is that people buy houses that need to be fixed up eventually. Or maybe they've been living there for some time and just haven't been in a position to want to necessarily fix the siding on their particular house, but would like to downsize to an ADU. And if they have to build to the same, to that same kind of exterior finish, then I think we're creating unintended consequences that we haven't really thought through. So I know that's not part of what we're discussing this year in Title 20, but I think it's something we should be aware of, that there are unintended consequences. And I don't see why variety is such a bad thing, especially in light of our greater societal conversations today. That's it, Jordan.
Thanks, Heather. I'd like to weigh in defense of a couple of the concepts that we've been talking about today. I appreciate the concerns around tourism, or around tourist homes. I think that there's a continued importance to monitoring the status of tourist homes and to make sure that we don't have a proliferation of them. And I think it's certainly time to maybe have an update on our tourist home ordinance and how it's going and so on. I think that I think notification in general, staff has worked very hard to make the notification process consistent across all types of notifications. And I think it's important to think about why we notify. We notify the public in order to give people the opportunity to weigh in, to influence projects, to lobby their council members, to provide comment. We also notify in other cases just so that people have an awareness of what's going on and so that they can be aware of what's happening in their neighborhood. And for whatever reason we notify, I think it's important that we are deliberate and consistent about it. One of the problems with the tourist home notifications was and it was born out of great intent, and I know we had a lot of discussion around this when the tourist home ordinance was passed, but the notification process is the only one that is out of the hands of staff, and staff were oftentimes having to redo that process anyway because the tourist home owners were unwilling or unable to do it properly, and also staff were not able to generate a list of properties that needed to be notified, and so for privacy concerns. And so what it turned out to be was a training session on how to notify, and it just was it made the process clunky, and it made it slower, and it made it inconsistent with our other notification processes. So I think the effort here to clean up notification is to make it consistent and to provide an intent statement that talks about how or why and when we notify, and what the importance of notification is. It's not to give a tourist home owner a pass to not have to do the work. It's more to reduce the workload for our city staff, who are oftentimes having to redo that notification. The other one that I want to defend is I think it's really important that we move forward with the parking changes that are proposed. I think that Heather brought up some really great points about the cost of building parking, but another one that we lose is the space of parking. Parking takes up a tremendous amount of space, and if someone is having to build 1 or 2 spaces for their ADU, or maybe on top of off-street parking spaces for their primary residence, that turns a garden into asphalt, or a yard space into a hardscape so it takes an amenity that we value and turns it into something that is a limiting factor, both from a cost standpoint as well as a space standpoint, and in addition to just any kind of livability or quality of life standpoint. So I think, we have tools in our toolkit to manage parking demand, and the residential parking permit program is one of those. There are others, and we certainly need to rewrite our parking chapter in Title 20. But I think that the parking piece is serving as more of a barrier to the development of ADUs than it is a protection to the neighborhood at this point. And so I think that's one that I'm personally very supportive of moving forward. So we have about 8 minutes left. We did start late, so we could probably run a few minutes over if we need to, but I want to make sure, so we need a motion to move this forward, this package of amendments. We also, if anyone has anything that they have real heartburn about, we should address that now. And then we can wrap up when that's all done. So Sandra and then Heather.
Oh, I'm just happy to make the recommended motion.
Okay,
to move this forward.
That motion is in order. Heather, and then Amber.
I was just going to make this the motion as well, so thank you.
Okay, great. And Amber's hand is down as well, so maybe that was her intent as well. Additional comment on the motion? Okay. Jen or Lavelle, could you maybe talk about process in terms of specific amendments moving forward? So if we, for example, if we want to look further at one of these amendments down the road, what would be, let's say we get a tremendous amount of public comment about not having sign identification tags or whatever it may be. What would be sort of our opportunity for amending and what would be our process moving forward to maybe alter or remove one of the proposals? Go ahead, Lavelle.
I'm being formal in the recognition. Sorry. So Lavelle Means here. We could, give Jordan. We could give you an update after a period of public comment to just see where things land and talk about another update to LUP. we generally would like to keep the process moving because you get limited time to be able to get before planning board. And right now planning board has several projects that are going to be coming their way. So if that were the case, we could come in and check in first with Jordan, and then you can help to decide if you think there's a time that would be helpful for all of LUP to hear what we're hearing. Otherwise, we can keep going, and it will take us to planning board, and planning board can help to sift through the comments and provide their recommendations, and then come to you for deliberation through LUP and consideration of setting a hearing. So that would be the typical place, but we can create a little pause or an update with you, Jordan, before we go to planning board if you'd like.
I think given the oversight or the advisory role that planning board has, I think it's really appropriate to go to planning board and then come back. And if there's real heartburn about any of the amendments that, at that time, we could address it at that time.
Great. One of the things, we could do also is I'd like to check in with Montana and Aaron related to some of the comments that we've heard. I've been in the loop with Invest Health and the idea of an ADU convening that we were going to have in Portland. We're going to have a virtual one here in Missoula, or virtual to host with others instead. And that also means we've been looking at Portland as a really great role model in what they do to be able to educate and support ADUs as a new tool. The idea of limiting it to not allow it for tourist home is something I've seen. I'd like to check in with Montana and her team to see whether there's if that's something they want to explore, or if we can just kind of keep going the way we have it with discussion at planning board and additional discussion with committee. So I think there's a few options on that particular one.
Great, thank you. Brian's hand is down. Okay. Any additional comments or questions before we vote? Okay, and then again, for the record, there's no one in the waiting room, so we can go ahead with the roll call vote.
Stacy Anderson,
Yes.
Berta Becerra,
Yes.
John Cantos,
Yes.
Heather Harp,
Yes.
Jordan Hess,
Yes.
Gwen Jones,
Yes.
Julie Merritt is absent, Jesse Ramos is absent, Amber Sherrill,
I think she might be, her screen looks, oh, there she is.
Oh. Amber, can you hear us?
Sorry, can you hear me? I don't know what's going on.
We can now.
I voted yes.
Sandra Vaseca,
Yes.
Brian Von Losberg,
Yes.
Heidi West,
Yes.
Great, so that passes unanimously and can go on our consent agenda. So great, I want to thank Jen and Laval and the Development Services staff for working on this package of amendments. It's comprehensive and it's a really important process. So we'll look forward to seeing this again after the planning board. And with no further agenda items, we will be adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good day.